All right.
Oh, and let me make sure it is Jeff. Is it Robison or Robison?
Robinson.
Okay.
Robinson.
I'm a little sensitive to last name pronunciations.
No, I understand. I understand.
So, okay, very good. Well, hey, everybody, thanks for joining us today. I'm so glad Jeff Robinson from GuideStone is with us. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to do it, William. Happy to do it.
Yeah, those of you who don't know, GuideStone is an amazing arm of the kingdom that helps pastors really manage their benefits and be able to retire. And I'd like to focus a little bit today, Jeff, in the short time we have, just to ask you've worked with, well, tell us how many different churches or pastors you've worked with, and as you talk about that, tell us why you're saying retirement planning is important both on the personal side for the pastor and for the church.
Sure, sure. Yeah, William, we literally work with hundreds of churches and pastors, well, thousands actually, as an organization. But it is important, this retirement planning subject, from a personal and from the church's perspective, because we want people, the participants, the individuals we deal with, we want them to retire with dignity when they are ready to retire, and we don't want not having saved enough for retirement to be a hindrance. If they've reached a point in their ministry that they feel it's time to transition into retirement, that's important, of course, from both the individual but also the church as an organization. If they feel like it's time to have, say, a new senior pastor come, and the senior pastor feels like it's time to move, you just don't want that to be a hindrance. And so with a retirement plan that's been designed properly for the individual and for the church, that's a win-win situation, for both the individual and the church body itself.
Well, I know in my experience working on successions with churches and pastors, there are a lot of times where the pastors made good money, but for one reason or another, the planning hadn't been done, and they just can't afford to retire. I don't. Is that something you've seen before?
Yes, I think it's a very common thing. It's just human nature. If we allow that money to get into our net paycheck, it's easily spent. And so, with just some prudent planning, it really kind of boils down to budgeting, William, at the end of the day. But if you do some budgeting, and the younger that we start that budgeting and get into those good habits of setting aside dollars for the future for our retirement, you're going to have shorter term goals, like maybe for a down payment or a home or a new automobile, and then intermediate term goals, maybe saving to educate our children, and then longer term goals for our golden years in retirement. And so it's just a matter of prioritizing through a budgeting process, but then actually doing it. And the sooner that, the sooner that the pastor, that the minister develops that habit, the earlier, the easier it is to be successful, because there's no magic to it. Ben Franklin called it the greatest invention, but that compounding growth, that compounding interest over a long period of time can add up to be a significant amount and allow somebody to retire when they want to.
Now, Jeff, like 6, 7 years ago, I started a project, started studying successions in churches, and it turned into a book. And people ask me, "Why'd you write that book?" My mother's asked me many times, "Why'd you write that book?" She thought she'd have to buy all 12 copies of it. But turns out a lot of copies sold, enough that we did a brand new, revised, and expanded edition. It's called Next Pastoral Succession, that works. But back 7 years ago, when people say, "Why'd you write it?" I said, just so succession could become a legitimate conversation. I think 6 or 7 years ago, it felt like nobody really wanted to talk about succession. And I think it feels a little different now, but I could be wrong. What's your take on how the conversation of succession has changed or not changed over the last decade or so?
I think it's a much more open conversation, to your point, than it was 6, 7, 10 years ago. And I think, the senior pastor, especially larger size church, they've invested their life, into that ministry, and they want to leave it in good hands. They want to have a very positive handoff, and then the members of the church want that. And then especially typically there is a committee or a ministry team that will help with these succession processes, and they want the pastor that served them a long time or staff member that served for a long time there to be taken care of. I think a lot of us feel like that reflects on us as members of the church, and so they want that pastor to be taken care of, but they also want to have as seamless a process as possible so that the ministry of the church goes on and is effective, and then there's nothing negative associated with it in any way. That'd be my take, William.
Well, I think you're hitting right on it, and it's going to become more and more of a conversation as more and more baby boomers hit retirement and start talking to you about their retirement, and there are fewer and fewer people available in their 45 to 60-year-old range to take over. So it's going to become a really interesting puzzle in the days and years to come. So let me just ask you, you know, when a church starts thinking about succession and the planning process, how do you see the best steps for them starting that out?
I think that they would rightfully, they're concerned, I think, that their current pastor, are they adequately prepared there? Are they prepared financially? But also, of course, there's the mental and emotional aspect of it, William, that I'm sure you'll speak to more, but, that those are very real, the emotional and mental adjustments that one will go through for retirement. But if they quickly detect that was a lack of preparation or not enough set aside for retirement, then there are some things that the church can do. They can look at. Obviously, if they have a little longer flight path and they have more time, they can do these things as opposed to doing them at the last minute. But they can use things like deferred compensation plans to make up for some lost time if they wanted to put additional funds aside, if the church is in the position to do that. But they also, if they're in a 403B church plan, as far as what they utilize for their retirement plan, they are allowed, the church, the employer, now it must be the employer's decision, they're allowed to make contributions for 5 years following the termination of an employee. And that can be on a case by case, individual by individual basis. It doesn't have to be across the board. And so depending on what the income was there, that can be significant sums of money. I mean, we're talking over $50,000 a year potentially. And so, that's $250,000. Now, granted, it would be done over a 5-year period post termination, but you can actually utilize methods and tools like that.
So walk me through this. Let's just take a hypothetical. It's not that
Mhm.
hypothetical. I've heard it many, many times, but we'll call it uh, Community Christian Church of Communityville, Indiana.
Mhm.
Just as plain a church as there is. Pastor founds the church, and he pastors it for 25, 30 years, and every time it's time to have any increase in the budget, they put it into more staff and more buildings, and the pastor says, I don't need a raise, just keep growing the church. And then
Mhm.
they turn about 60 years old. Maybe that's too little time for you to work with, and they've just got next to no retirement. What are some tangible steps they could take to see if the board wanted to say, pastor's poured this whole career into this church and he's got 5 to 7, maybe 10 years left. We need to accelerate what we're doing for him so he can actually retire when the time's right.
Yes, and if he has 5 to 7 years, that's ideal. That we have some, like I said, a glide path to work with. And so, obviously, William, the first thing we would look at is the pastor and or the church together. Are they maximizing? Are they placing the maximum amount that he could put into his retirement plan first? And if not, we recommend that, that's maximized. So on somebody over 50, they're going to be able to put $26,000 themselves, and then the church can put an additional over 30 on top of that, because between the pastor and the church, this year there could be $57,000 a year contributed just in the retirement plan. And the additional amount, this additional 6,500, if they're over 50, is on top of that. So that gets me back to 62.5, I believe, if my math is correct there. Then if they say, well, that's not going to be adequate, we only have these 5 to 7 years because of the amount of savings, that's when they could layer on top of that a deferred compensation plan, to where it just has to be reasonable what they put in. That's what the IRS says. It must be reasonable, but they could put significant sums. They could say, well, this is what's compensated, a peer church of this size. This is the kind of compensation that a peer church might be doing. And we need to make up for some lost time. We're going to put some dollars in for the next 5 to 7 years, significant dollars, into this deferred compensation plan for our pastor, because he spent his life work here and poured into this church and ministry. So that's just an example of how that would work.
So let's just pull numbers out of the air. Let's say that the pastor's been, round numbers, okay? So the pastor's been making $50,000 a year, and the church is so big that really competitive pay should have been $100,000 for the last 10 years. Can the church go backwards and say, we've been behind and we're in arrears and we want to make up for it in deferred compensation?
Effectively, yes. Yes, they can look. They can look, and they can, and it just has to be reasonable on what they're contributing on a go-forward basis there. But they could put $50,000 to $100,000, depending on the size of the church, and probably come away with that is reasonable, that we're putting this 50 to 100. So, given our time frame in this hypothetical, that could be, what did you say, for about 7 years? That's 350 to $500,000. Just depending on if it's 5 or 7, or if it's 50 or 100.
Without
So
that greatest invention of compound interest.
that's right. Yeah, that's just the contributions without any growth over that. That's right.
Well, I say that for a couple reasons. One, if you're in that boat, you're not alone. There are a
Right.
whole lot of pastors. Do not feel insecure or bashful. If you're like, you know what, I have not been taking the raise, or if you're a board chair and you're sitting there saying, we haven't been giving the raise, and just to be blunt with board chairs, you might be sitting there saying, well, pastor didn't take a raise and we could do something, but that's awfully expensive. Let me just tell you, having worked with churches that are going through succession, the most expensive thing you can do is mess up the succession.
Yeah.
And if the proper time for the pastor to retire can't be used because the pastor can't afford to retire, you have just wasted a ton of money. So that's just my personal infomercial to board chairs out there, to make it right so that pastors can retire at the proper time. Retirement is in the Bible. The only place it's mentioned is about the priests, and that the priests are required to retire at a certain age. Something about carrying the things of God just gets too heavy after a while, and I would just encourage you all as board members, you are doing God's work by taking care of your pastor for the long haul. And I also bring it up for one other reason, Jeff, and I think you may be aware of this, but churches say, well, we don't know what's fair. We don't know, what is the right number. There are some resources out there for finding out what's fair and balanced pay. There's several manuals out there that you can purchase. NACBA has some
Yes.
resources available.
Yes.
We've spent the last 2 years crunching our own numbers, because we literally have tens of thousands of pastors telling us what they're making every year, and churches reporting to us what their salaries are. So we hired some really smart math people that are grad students at Texas A&M, and yes, that means they can still be really smart people, even though it's Texas
Right.
A&M.
Right.
And they've helped us crunch the numbers and build a tool where, if you need help, just email us or call us, and we'll walk you through that process. A really low cost thing to do, to just know what's fair, because nobody wants to show each other, what's behind the curtain, and no churches really talk about who's getting paid what.
Right. Right. William, a couple of just quick things to point out too, that we run into this over and over again. Many pastors don't realize that they can claim housing allowance against the benefits when they retire. They know they can claim housing allowance against their salaries. You know, they're used to doing that and during their working years, but that's very powerful. The fact that they may be able to not pay federal income tax on many of these dollars that have been set aside for them by the church, or that they have reduced their salary and set aside for themselves. And so that's a very integral part of the planning process, is knowing that they will be able to claim housing against at least part of the distribution when it's coming out. And sometimes also with proper planning, they may want to delay taking their Social Security benefit to age 70 so that the benefit is permanently increased due to delayed retirement credits between their normal full retirement age of, say, 66 or 66 and so many months and age 70. The Social Security will give you an 8% increase between that full retirement age and 70. So depending on their individual circumstances, their health, that may be the most prudent thing for them to wait so they have a higher benefit from Social Security. That combined, with the housing allowance, make a very powerful combination when we're talking about retirement planning for pastors.
Well, this is precisely why we love working with you all, because there are a lot of good vehicles out there. If you work for another group, don't think I'm saying this is the only thing out there. But boy, we love GuideStone and the work you guys do. Uh, the, I will tell you that Jeff, when we do succession, and I start to try and figure out if a pastor can retire, I ask if they've been using GuideStone, and when they say yes, it's very rare that there's an issue with how much retirement compensation is going to be coming their way. And I know that sounds like an endorsement. It is, because we're believers in you guys and what you're doing, and you make our job easier because we're trying to help the church with the succession. And if the pastor can afford to retire, it's a win all the way around.
Well,
So thank you.
that's our mission, is to serve that pastor at the crossroads and try to help them plan so that they have an adequate retirement and can retire with dignity. That's what we're all about. So,
Well, these are the things that don't exactly make the headlines, especially this year when there's so many other
sure.
headlines. But I'm telling you, it is a wave that has not yet crested of boomers retiring, and it's going to be a big issue. So appreciate you, Jeff, and all that you're doing to help the church in this corner. We're in your corner and here for you. Thank you for making time for us today.
Well, thank you for having me, William.
That's going to be good.
We good?
I think we're good. She told me 15 minutes, and that's spot on.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yep.
Well,